Well, I was sort of a punk, so I was like I put myself in the group of outsiders. I was like I wanted to like shock people, when I was 13, 14, wear safety pins in my school blazer and, or even younger, I was about 11 then. So obviously I was quite young when punk came out, but it was, my brother and sister had brought me up on Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, so music was always in our house. We've got older brothers and sister. And and then when punk came out and I saw the Sex Pistols and the Clash, I just went like, this is going to set me apart. Shove their stupid rock music, and I've got this now, Pretty Vacant, and so I sort of grew up feeling like a little bit alternative. So I've always been the alternative indie kid, really, since I was a kid. So I worked in a record shop when I was 14, in an indie shop. So I was like really, I just loved vinyl. I loved records. I loved music. So couldn't make it, but I loved selling it, and I loved listening to new stuff, like getting new albums in. I remember when Human League's first album came out, and that being the big album, and listening to that, and my taste in music grew massively. I was listening to dub, listening to the Clash, obviously, and Crass and Discharge, heavy metal, Dead Kennedys, rock, listening to all amalgamations of all this music, and it was just like then that record shop closed when I was about 15, and then sort of really missed it, but kept buying records, and then sort of just like forgot about music and got into getting a job and stuff like that. For a kid from Redditch in Worcestershire, which is quite an industrial sort of town, or it was in the 80s, it was just that's what's expected of you, and so you sort of do what's expected of you for a few years, and then you go, hold on a second, there's more to life than jobs, money, and wine bars. It's like, that was my lyrics at the time, and it was like I just thought that, I wanted to be involved in music somehow, with not knowing anybody, probably knew Ozzy Osbourne's nephew, vaguely. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really vaguely. So, hi. That was it. So I didn't know anyone. There was no sort of musical people around to encourage me. So then I met Matthew in an advert in the paper. Matthew Priest, yeah. And
when was the defining probably moment where you thought you wanted to pick up an instrument and play and write? Was the something happening years before?
I started playing when I was about 13 or 14. So I just bought a guitar. My parents wouldn't, I don't know, they didn't have the money to get me a guitar, so I had to get a guitar from my friend's mom, who got it me out of a catalogue.
Right.
And I used to give her my paper money each week, and I had a guitar that way.
Were they not kind of musical brothers and sisters?
No one was in my family. I was the only one that was I was really into electronics. I'm really into I like wiring things and making things connect. I'm a bit a bit geeky in that way, so I've got my studios, and I've always run studios, and I like that sort of thing. So the guitar was like plugging it into my hi-fi at home, and the tape deck, and turning the gain volume up of the recording to get distortion. So I sort of work things out myself.
From about 13.
Yeah.
And then when do you come to the point of putting an advert in? Was it?
No, I didn't. I answered one. Well, I first had a band I joined a band, I was about 17, and I was in punk bands. I was in punk bands when I was about 15, and we were like sort of really hardcore anarchist, anti-vivisection, vegetarians. Right. We were like all wore black. We were anarchists, man. It was like, we had something to fight for. So and we were still at school. So that was like a hardcore punk band, and that were good. But I didn't even know what I did in that band. So whether I played bass or sang or whatever, I don't know. We just got round together at our mate's house, got loads of like paraphernalia together, and wrote songs about animals suffering, and and peace, and
Yeah.
I suppose we were like anarcho hippies in a way.
Yeah. How did you actually come up to be Dodgy?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of like, I suppose, we've been looking for a band name for ages, and we were just terrible at doing it. And because as soon as you start thinking about something, you're buggered, really. You've just got to let it happen, and something will just spring out at you. And anyway, we were living in Hounslow, and we went into London on a Friday night to have some beers in Leicester Square. We used to go to a pub in Leicester Square, and we were only young, and And on the way home, we went to Leicester Square train station, and we had some magic mushrooms left over from somewhere, and we put them on the little squares of pizza you can get, and we ate them. And I mean, they're supposed to be good for you, and they are, I think. And not condoning it, but we had those, and we were sitting on the tube going home to Hounslow, which is about a 40-minute ride, and your stomach starts going blip, 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 blip. And Chris, my mate, who's Math's brother, went, I feel a bit dodgy. And I went, I feel a little bit dodgy as well. And so it was just that word, and it kept coming up. And while we were on the train, I went, why don't we call the band Dodgy? You know, because it's a very English word. And it's like The Who, because it's like a piss take in a way. So it was like, Dodgy's like, sort of like, you got to get it, do you know what I mean? And it was like, we were in that moment of like, you getting it, you know, we're like, off our heads, you know, and we're getting it. And it was like, and then we woke up in the morning, and it was like, yeah, we did, didn't we? We were called Dodgy, and it felt right. And then we were being sort of, that on the Monday, that was a Friday, on the Monday, Food Records, who had just signed Blur, were really interested in the band. And then Andy Ross phoned me up and said, yeah, you know, what we're going to do and all that. I went, Andy, we've come up with a band name. And he went, what is it? And I went, it's Dodgy. And he went, okay, we can't do anything. He just like made a decision, we can't do anything. I went, okay, well that sorted that out, you know. Do you know what I mean? In a way, it was like sort of, and I think from then on we've always managed to be quite sort of outsiders in the whole thing, which is kind of a nice, because, you know, I think for a lot of bands they can't change, like, you know, Radiohead to go and do a really positive song would be like, what? Or a pop song, it'd be like, you know, Oasis to do, you know, anything, you know, would be like, what? Because they're not together, but, you know, people get really easily stereotyped. Good thing about Dodgy is we aren't stereotyped.
That was what I was going to ask you. How do you feel about the genre? Obviously, there was coming out of the grunge, there was Britpop. I read somewhere that you said that you felt that you gatecrashed someone else's party in the genre of the
well,
Britpop.
all they gatecrashed as, yeah. I think that, you know, the thing is, if you look back, that the Dodgy Club started in 1989, and we had a poster, and it would say, the Dodgy Club down the side. Dodgy would appear at 10 o'clock in Kingston, this was, and we'd list all the bands that we'd DJ, De La Soul, Dead Kennedys, Neil Young, Nina Simone, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, the Beastie Boys. And so it was a whole sort of, like, this was saying, we're these sort of people, you know, this is what sort of music we like. And we'd DJ that. It was more about the club. There was more DJ music than there was the band. We played for half an hour. But then within 2 years, we got signed from the Dodgy Club. But within 2 years, you had the Heavenly Social Club, and you had this whole sort of, but it was, Dodgy Club was first. Do you know what I mean? We were the first people to go, the 60s is very similar to now. And so bringing all the 60s bands in, because that's what we were listening to, and it was really important. So that, in a way, was, you know, where the whole thing comes from anyway. So it was, Dodgy Club was where it all, because we didn't have any sort of reason to be, we just wanted to be ourselves, and that's who we were, you know. We listened to Neil Young and Nina Simone, and, you know, Punk and Beastie Boys and De La Soul and Delight, and, you know, all these sort of, you know, things that were going on. So it was like a place to be.